Story 1. Parents, neighbors, aunts, uncles, teachers. It was pretty much open season on us kids before the 1970s. Mostly okay as long as you steered clear of the ones with their own paddles. Story 2. My mom did, but honestly just a bit when I did dumb and dangerous things as a kid. She was never cruel about it, just a slap so I would understand I shouldn't do it. Story 3. Once I played with matches and nearly burned the building down. My dad spanked my behind a bit. I never played with matches again. Once in my early teens, I had a tantrum and started calling my mother every hurtful swear word I could think of. After a minute or two, she just slapped me on the face once. Snapped me out of it and made me realize what I was doing. Spanking was seen as a last resort and applied very sparingly and rarely. As a result, it served to punctuate a handful of important lessons and wasn't a regular disciplinary tool. Story 4. Yes, my mother did a lot. But the thing is, I wasn't a bad kid. She was angry at her own life, and I ended up taking the punishment for it. As a child, I didn't understand what was happening. But as an adult, I realized I was abused. She didn't use her hands much. She liked the big plastic kitchen stirring spoons on bare skin. The strike hurt, but it also stung for ages afterward. I got hit all the time, sometimes for lying, even though I didn't lie. One memory that's burned into my mind happened when I was about 5. She had turned on the television for me and told me to sit down and watch, likely so I wouldn't bother her. The program showed a man playing guitar in front of some kids, and she said, "This is a kids' show. Watch this." A few minutes later, the man stopped playing, the kids went back to their seats, and it became clear this was a church service. I went to tell her. She came into the room, saw the church service, and said, "The other show must have finished." I tried to explain what had happened, but she accused me of lying. She wouldn't believe me, and I got hit for it. That moment shaped me. I've grown up with an absolute hatred of liars. I can't stand it. I don't lie, but it seems like the rest of the world does. Watching people lie constantly and face no consequences is crushing to me. It's not that I want people to be punished. It's just that I was punished for telling the truth. But I live in a world where lying is so often rewarded, and I just don't understand how that works. When I got older, the abuse shifted. I'd get hit for not cleaning the house well enough. She'd come home from work on Saturdays, yelling and slamming doors, even though I'd already done the cleaning she'd required. She'd vacuum the house herself while screaming at me for not doing a good enough job, even though I had. Of course I had, because I knew what would happen if I didn't. Although I didn't know it at the time, I realized when I got older that her anger wasn't about the house. It was about something else. But as always, I took the blame. For years into adulthood, I'd have panic attacks if someone else started vacuuming. I had learned that vacuuming meant punishment was coming. When I first got married, my wonderful husband would help clean, but I couldn't cope. Someone else cleaning equaled abuse was coming in my mind. My husband has never even raised his voice to me, but it took years to overcome my reaction to the sound of a vacuum. Even now, if I hear a vacuum, there's a strange little knot in my stomach, a quiet reminder of the past. The abuse shaped my life in so many ways. By the time I was 10 or 11, I'd already decided I'd never have children. I was terrified I might treat them the way I had been treated. Later, as an adult, I realized I wouldn't have been that way, but cancer eventually made the choice for me. The physical abuse didn't stop until 3 days before my 18th birthday. I don't remember what started that particular incident, but I do remember how it ended. She was ranting, raising her hand to hit me, but this time something inside me snapped. I looked her in the eye and said, "Go ahead, hit me, but this time, I'll hit you back so hard you won't know what just happened." I didn't know what would happen next. I fully expected her to hit me, but I also knew I only had 3 days until I was free. I told myself I could survive 3 days no matter what, but she didn't hit me. That was the last time. Edit to add that back then it wasn't unacceptable to hit your children, and until the age of 18, kids had no rights. If I had run away, I would have been taken back by the police, and it would have just made things worse. So to me, freedom couldn't come until I was legally allowed to leave, which was, at the time, 18. I'm a grown woman now with a strong character, but the scars of that abuse run deep. Being hit constantly as a child had a profoundly negative impact on my life. I don't believe in hitting kids. Maybe a light tap to stop a toddler from touching a hot stove. But beyond that, don't hit your kids. It doesn't teach them, it only breaks them. Story 5. No, my parents did not really believe in it, and I was pretty well behaved anyway. If I did something I should not do, they talked to me about why I should not do it. And for the most part, I listened. Things were chill and good. Story 6. It taught me my dad was someone to be feared, not loved. Then I spent until the age of 18 in constant fear of him, even after he stopped doing it when I was in my teenage years. The verbal bullying was worse, though. Then I moved out and did not need to fear him ever again. Story 7. It taught me to fear my parents rather than discipline, so I still did things behind their backs and lied about it, even about other things that wouldn't get me in trouble, just to try and control their reactions. Story 8. Yes, it just made me lose respect for them and be more sneaky so I didn't get caught. I don't spank my kids, and they are all very well behaved and respectful. Communication goes much further if you actually intend to have a good relationship with your kids. Story 9. It became less threatening as I grew older, because even with a belt, I knew my dad wouldn't seriously hurt me. It was much more the drama and shame than the actual spanking. He was delivering a message and not a beating. I know it's not acceptable these days. I think my dad was careful, so we never felt abused. It was reserved for behavior we already knew the consequences of, so it was never a surprise. I think the way my parents used it was as appropriate as it gets for the purpose of correcting behavior. But I am sure it requires the utmost self-discipline to toe that line when angry. I won't attempt that. I use my words. Story 10. Yes, my parents spanked me as a form of discipline, and the impact it had on me was layered and complex. On the surface, there are the usual and common consequences: fear of authority figures, a tendency to associate mistakes with punishment rather than learning, and this lingering need to overachieve to avoid disappointing others. It's like carrying this invisible weight of expectations everywhere you go, always afraid of stepping out of line. But beneath that, it deeply shaped my sexuality in ways that I didn't fully understand until I was older. I developed what you might call daddy issues, where I crave the approval of strong, authoritative figures, almost as if I'm trying to rewrite those childhood dynamics in a way that feels validating rather than demeaning. That desire for approval feeds into this yearning for ritualized punishment, but in a consensual, controlled way that turns a past trauma into something I can now actively choose and embrace. Then there's the humiliation kink. It's hard to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it, but the vulnerability of being humiliated, paired with the safety of knowing it's done consensually, has this almost cathartic release. It's like confronting shame head-on, but this time on my terms. It's weirdly empowering and healing in a way that surprises even me. So yeah, spanking is discipline. It left marks that are more psychological than physical. It shaped me in ways I'm still exploring, for better and worse. Story 11. I was a pretty good kid overall, so I can count on one hand how many times it happened. I don't consider myself having been abused, and I think it was, overall, fine. Didn't impact me one way or another really, because again, it happened so rarely, and it was my mom, so it wasn't even that hard if I'm being honest. I think spanking can easily go overboard, and I know some people who, if I'm being honest, would say their parents went too far. But at the same time, I'm not of the mind that any physical punishment is inherently bad. Story 12. It's always good to clarify the difference between a spanking and abuse. People who were abused cannot see the difference, and people who were simply disciplined think those people are being ridiculous. There is a huge difference between being disciplined for sticking something into an outlet and punching a child in the face or causing any sort of bruising or bleeding. Edit. I forgot Reddit is full of people without children who think they know how to parent. Never mind. Story 13. Sure did. I was at the age that I did not understand why I was being punished, so my survival strategy was to just stay in my room and be quiet as much as possible. Story 14. I got smacked on the bum if I did something really bad. I think the last time was when I threw a stone at a new window, and my dad smacked me. I always had a healthy fear of getting in trouble and a healthy fear of my parents when I was a kid, but they were also very loving. It seems outdated now, and I wouldn't smack my kids, but times are different, I guess. Story 15. Yes, and I suspect it's mostly the reason I have an irrational fear of men speaking loudly or yelling. It may also be part of why I'm afraid of loud noises. Story 16. Yes, but I don't remember. I have kids of my own now, and I can't imagine raising my hand to them. In the same way, I would never hit a partner or a pet. Good or bad aside, wanting to be violent to someone you love is very weird. Story 17. My mom did not hit me, and she heavily opposed my dad spanking my brother and me. However, she never stopped him from doing it. I learned quickly to pretend I was asleep by the time he got home from work so I'd be spared. I got hit until the age of 15, and for a while it affected me negatively. But as an adult, I pity my father for not having the skills to explain why I was in trouble to begin with, and instead, resorting to hitting defenseless, confused, and scared children. Story 18. Yes, now I flinch anytime someone is mad around me. If you hit anyone else, even an animal, it's assault or abuse, and you get arrested. It shouldn't be any different because the person in question is a child. Story 19. Yes, my mother used to have a long cane to punish me whenever I did something bad. It made me fear my parents, and I became a liar to avoid getting spanked. I still did a lot of things that I was forbidden to do, like browsing pornography, going to the internet cafe, and buying comics. Story 20. My dad called it corporal discipline. He would legitimately throw me around the room and beat me. One time when I was 10, he threw me across the kitchen table because I didn't know how to do the math on my homework properly. My mother allowed this to happen. Her torture was more psychological. As a result of this, I have very much post-traumatic stress disorder and a lot of self-doubt. As a direct result of my dad's abuse, I do not hit my son. Story 21. I don't spank my children because my mom was abusive. I got spanked or beaten for minor infractions. I always worried that if something happened, I would get spanked, which I did. It destroyed me mentally. Even as an adult, I expect physical punishment when I do something wrong. Do not spank your children. Story 22. Yeah, I was never even really a kid that did anything wrong. And I literally mean that I just didn't disobey, like ever. But any little infraction, one of which was playing with some neighborhood kids my age at around 7, got me spanked. I still remember that one. It didn't help, it didn't teach me respect. It taught me that they didn't respect me and that I couldn't trust them. It taught me to fear and recoil into myself. I'm no contact with my entire family now, for this and other reasons. But spanking was right in line with the kind of people like them. All the medical studies on how spanking impacts the brain show the same thing. That brains of these kids can't separate being beaten from discipline with spanking. It causes the same trauma on the brain as a child who is abused. It doesn't matter if you think you're abusing them. Having been spanked, I would never spank a child, and so many that I've babysat who are used to being spanked, I was able to calm down and talk to them like a human being without resorting to just spanking to shut them up. And there are so many other ways of discipline that actually teach them something. Fear isn't respect, and I think that's a disconnect that so many adults don't understand. Story 23. Yes, and I turned out fine. The spanking really was the least of my worries. I went from the hand to the paddle to the belt. Then my mom started with the guilt tripping and gaslighting, which was far more damaging, in my opinion. Physical damage heals, but psychological damage is forever. Story 24. Yes, although my brother got it worse than I did. He did tend to be a little more overt in his opposition, but I'm sure the imbalance was more in relation to me being both younger and a girl. It taught us to fear our parents and led us to be more sneaky. There were also times when we would get in trouble for telling about a situation, either because we were involved in the misdeed or accused of lying, and then we would eventually stop telling them things. It is worth noting that, in my experience, often these spankings were beyond punishment. It would be clear that the adults were angry and taking that out on us. I have often wondered if that's the key difference between those who believe their childhood spankings were acceptable and those who don't. I was actually thinking a couple of days ago about the little ways my parents, alongside our wider network of adults, taught us that we were burdens, troublemakers, or otherwise some type of problem to be solved. Rarely were we praised for our individuality, kindness, intelligence, and ingenuity. So often, those shining moments of the adults we would grow into were treated like brief moments of reprieve for the ever-responsible adults. I'm now a rather fiercely independent person, and I've wondered how much that is the result of my upbringing. I've worked through a lot of these things. Like I said, my brother had it worse and he still struggles. He needs therapy to help work through it, and I'm hopeful he's able to access that soon. United States-based therapy isn't covered by his insurance. We talked about employee assistance program opportunities to aid with this. Another thing, I would like to be a parent. I wonder how much of that desire is my wish to bring up a child in a healthier environment, to show that someone amazing can come from a long familial history of trauma. My dad, in particular, had a far more abusive childhood, and I know enough about my mother's family to know there are additional stories of family abuse and trauma. It's hard to look at these things, to think of the impact, and know that I'm one of the fortunate ones. I didn't experience those more extreme levels of abuse, and I've had the time and space to work through it. Most of the other adults in my family have not. They had to work constantly, raise children, struggle with finances. They couldn't read a book about trauma, go to therapy, and all that.